Hi, I'm Brandi Larsen, and it is a delight to be here. Thank you so much to Reverend Dr. Lewis and all of the amazing people behind the scenes who are bringing this conference to you virtually. We're going to be talking about unlocking the big five, how traditional publishing works. My name, again, is Brandi Larsen. This is my social media handle at Brandi Larsen, and my website is brandilarsen.com. That's a lot of Brandi Larsens. I want to take just 30 seconds and tell you a little bit about me and try and earn your attention for this presentation. So right now, I am the board president of Literary Cleveland, a phenomenal nonprofit committed to creating a vibrant and diverse literary arts scene in Northeast Ohio, helping people explore other voices and discover their own. If you need writing help, they're a great organization. I'm a writer, I'm a speaker, I'm a coach. I spent years as a journalist at the Chicago Tribune, and then also worked at Penguin Random House on the publishing side. I had the joy of bringing to life some of the bestsellers, working with authors who I admired on properties that America loved. And so I was at Penguin Adult as well as DK, creating the books that you see in bookstores, in libraries, and across your living room. And so creating those books and being on that side of the table brings me to why I can talk to you on how to understand the big five and get what you need out of it and into it. So I'm going to talk in a couple different ways. The first is I'm going to explain who they are, this big five, and what they do. And then I'm going to explain how you can enter. So let's dive in and get started with who they are and what they do. But the big five presses that we're talking about Penguin Random House. And Penguin and Random House used to be different companies, and they merged together just a few years ago. There's HarperCollins, there's Simon & Schuster, there's Hachette, and Macmillan. And so when people talk about the big five, those are the companies that people are talking about. So there's a few different types of books. There's hardcovers, paperbacks, ebook, audio, specials, comic, chap, picture books, chapter books, and board books. And so let me talk to you just a tiny bit about what those different formats are. So hardcover books are the larger books that come out. Oftentimes, when it's a new writer and a debut writer, you'll see them either in hardcover or paperback. Hardcovers are the first time a book comes out, and so they are larger, they have a higher price point. So you're looking at something around $29.95, $26.95 and up. Paperbacks are smaller, they're flexible, and they're literally made out of paper. And you'll see those as a second printing. So if a book came out, and as an example, when Becoming, Michelle Obama's book, came out, it came out in hardcover first, and then there was a smaller trade paperback that would come out after that. And so that's to allow people to be in different markets and different price points. That's why there are those two different formats. Ebook are the books that you hold in your hand that are on your screen, whether it's your tablet or your phone. Audio is what you're listening to. Audio is becoming one of the fastest growing book categories by format over the last few years. And specials are these interesting little hybrids, and so you'll see a book sometime that just says only for Target, and that's a special, and it's a conversation that happens between the publisher and a retailer to make a book specifically for one outlet. And of course, comic books, those are the graphic novels, and chap books are poetry books, and board books, and picture books, and chapter books. This is what we're talking about for YA and middle grade and kids literature. So chapter books are books that are cut into chapters, and they're generally for early readers and beyond. And picture books can sometimes be board books and sometimes be on their own, and they're the books that have an illustrator as well as an author. They're often different people, but sometimes they're the same. And those are illustrated books designed as read-alouds for kids. And then the board books are made out of cardboard. They're often square, and they're for kids to gnaw on and be okay with. And so those are the different types of books formats that come out. We're going to talk about some different terms, and I just wanted to give you an overview so that as I start to talk about them, you understand what's going on. And so the first is comps, inquiries, and proposals. And these live together. These are going to be the tools that you need to describe your book to get into the process. So a comp is books' comparative titles. Comparative titles are books that are published within the last 5 years that are like your books. And we'll get into some of the storied history around comps and some thoughts about comps a little bit later. But just know that a comp is a book that was published in the last 5 years that has a similar sales track to your book and is similar to your book in both of its content or its tone. Queries, this is a piece of paper or an email that you will create. So this is a letter saying, this is what my project is. A query is a email or letter that you're going to create that says, this is what my project is, this is why I am the right person to publish this project, and this is why my project needs to be published right now. It's a 1-letter piece, very, very short, just a few paragraphs. That's what a query is. And a proposal is essentially the business plan for your book. And so if you are writing a nonfiction book, you'll create a book proposal, and it will include things like why you are the right person to write the book, everything that was in the query, as well as sample chapters, more research into the market. And so it will be a really solid proposal explaining why your book needs to be in the world right now. Next is the New York Times, also known as the NYT or the list. This is the bestseller list. There are lots of bestseller lists that are out there. There's the Amazon list, there's the USA Today list, but the list, when people start talking about the list, is the New York Times bestselling list. This list is complicated. There was a great piece on Medium, which I'll link to from my website, that talks about how many people of color have been on this list for the last 20 years, and the number is shatteringly small. There's a lot of complications about this list, the way that the list is put together, that is not known publicly because it's one of the things that the New York Times says is proprietary. And so you don't know what their algorithm is, the way they put it together. However, what it's supposed to be is cash register sales from all of the sales in a previous week by category. And so when people start talking about the list, that's what they're talking about, because being on the list can change an author's career. And so trying to get on the list and creating your book for that purpose, which your publisher will really think through, is one of the goals that people have in publishing, because it can really change both your sales and your book career. The list is an external marker of sales. Front list and back list and season are when a book comes out. And so in publishing, there are 3 or 4 seasons a year. The fall season is generally the biggest season. It is when those big books come out in October, leading right up to Christmas and the holidays. There are also spring and summer seasons, and depending on the house, sometimes there is a winter season as well. The books that are coming out in any specific season and for about a year are called the front list. And so those are titles that the house is really focused on for that period of time. After that period of time, a book moves to the back list, and that's when it sells and sells and sells and sells into eternity. The reason why we're still buying The Catcher in the Rye and Awakening and Passing is because they're backlist titles that continue to sell. And so for a publishing company, they need a strong front list as well as a solid backlist in order to survive and thrive in today's book market. The words OSD and pub date are the same. OSD stands for on sale date. It's when a book is born. BISAC and metadata. So this is understanding what's happening on the back end of your book. So books are put out into the world via a feed, and that feed has a lot of data encrypted into it in the same way that websites have information that's put in. And so that information is what helps a reader find your book. And so understanding what your BISAC is, and that's really thinking about your shelf. What shelf does my book live on? There are hundreds and hundreds of categories of BISACs, and what your publishing house is thinking about is where does this live, because each place will have a different sales channel that it's sold to. House and imprint. House and imprint. Your publishing company might also be called a house, and inside it, it's split up into groups, and then in those groups, like adult versus children, there'll also be imprints. And an imprint is the specific place where editors are working, and they publish a specific type of book. And we'll talk about those imprints in just a moment. And I have a bonus term for you. And so these are printing terms. There's offset printing and POD. And so POD stands for print on demand. And offset printing is when you start to print bigger or smaller than what is the standard for hardcover or paperback. So those art books are generally offset. And those are more expensive because the printing costs are higher. And so I just wanted to give you a little printing term if you ever hear that in your publishing journey. As we talk about imprints and divisions, so I'm going to show you Penguin Random House as an example. And so to give you an idea of the different types of flavors, so you have different groups. Penguin is a group, Random House is a group, Penguin Young Readers is a group, Random House Children's Books also a group. Inside Penguin, for example, you've got different imprints, and these imprints have different books that they publish, many of them having full editorial freedom to publish what they choose. And so Berkeley is a phenomenal example. They publish women's fiction, they publish romance, they publish commercial thrillers and suspense, really great books that come out of that imprint. Then you have Riverhead, which is known for its more literary fiction titles. And then you have Tarcher Perigee, for example, which is known for self-help and advice books. You've got Penguin Press, so that you think about the Black Spines and the classics. So each of these imprints has editors and artists and people all across who are thinking about, how do I put this book into the right reader's hand? And they're as varied as there are writers who are writing books. I want to talk about book publishing departments and roles so you get an idea of who's in the room. There are over 60 hands who love a book into life, every single book inside traditional publishing. And so these roles all come together in a collaborative way to make a book a book. They're really loved into life. When you think about it, publishing companies are set up as corporations, right? So you've got the CEO's office, and then you've got some of the corporate divisions like communications and development and HR and finance and legal, just as you would have in any business. Then you've got the publisher, and the publisher is the person who is making decisions and responsible for all of the books that are coming out, and then everyone will roll up to that person, with the exception in some houses of sales, which report directly to the president or the CEO's office. Inside these different offices of each publishing house, and then also each imprint, depending on how the house is set up, you've got editorial and sales and publicity and design and data and rights and the business office and marketing and production and managing editorial. There are so many different types of roles that can bring a book to life and that are needed for it. So editorial are the jobs that you would think of, right? That is they consist of editors and editorial assistants. They're the people who are reading the books, deciding what should come into play. And so sales departments are the people who are going out and selling your book through the book distribution chain. And so they're looking at how to make sure that it has the best impact, right? They're having conversations with the different supply chain, whether it's Barnes & Noble or Amazon or Apple, and really figuring out how that book can get into the world. Publicity, these are the people who are calling up news agencies and media outlets and pitching your story on why this book out of all of the books are worth covering. Design, so there's interior and exterior design for your book. The exterior, you're thinking your book cover as well, and the interior are the beautiful moments inside the book. So you're thinking about typesetting, you're thinking about those really pretty little marks, you're thinking about the fonts. The design folks are doing all of that. And there's the data team. The data team is responsible for looking at metadata. They're looking at trends. They're trying to figure out how to make sure that your book gets out and makes a difference and is able to be discovered. There's the rights team. So there's foreign rights and domestic rights, subsidiary rights. All your book is under contract, and so your rights team is going out to other publishing houses around the world and saying, we have this amazing book and we really want you to be able to publish it in Japanese or in Korean or in your territory. And so the rights folks will work on your behalf to do that. There's the business office. And so those are the people who, when an editor comes in and says, I love this book, I want to acquire it, the business manager will run the numbers and run a P&L. And so every single book is essentially its own little business, and they figure out how much will this book make a profit and what will we lose from publishing this book? How can we make sure that the numbers match for the author as well as for the publishing house? So the business office does a lot of that, and then they do a lot of the supplemental tasks that make a business run. There's the marketing department, and these are the people who are thinking about creative campaigns and advertising and how do we get our book to be heard through all the noise. There's the production team, and so this team working alongside managing editorial, who are essentially the people who are creating the full setup and following your book at every single piece. So managing editorial will work with production at the very final stages to turn the book from a file into a piece of paper that is put between cardboard and held in your hand. And so that's how those teams all start to work together to really create how a book happens. So there's the external publishing roles as well. There's one I'm sure you all know about, which is authors. Authors work with literary agents. Agents are people who represent a book to publishers and negotiate a deal. An agent should be someone who is in your corner, who helps you and really advocates for you and for the book. There's the booksellers, and so these are people that are working either in chains or in indies or in different outlets that are selling a book to a reader. There are book reviewers. These people are folks who are reading books ahead of publication and sharing why the book is worth reading. There's readers. A book's biggest fans are the people who read it, and readers are the biggest element of any book's success. Sales and distribution channels. How does a book make it from a publishing house into a reader's hand? One of the ways is through the retail channel. That is Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple. When you think about where you go and you buy books, a lot of it is through big chain retail. There's also the indie channel, and so the lovely, wonderful independent bookstores all around Cleveland. I'm thinking about Apple Tree Books, I'm thinking about Loganberry Books, I'm thinking about the Bookshop in Lakewood. There are hundreds of great independent bookstores around the country, and they have a relationship. There are hundreds of amazing independent bookstores all around the country, and those bookstores have relationships with publishers to make sure that they're getting sales for their stores, for their readers. There's wholesaling clubs. When you go to Sam's Club, when you go to Costco and you see the books laid out on a table, someone from the sales department has had a conversation with people inside Costco and Sam's Club in order to sell those books to the clubs, to then sell those books to the readers. There's a distribution chain called ReaderLink, and that sells to Target and Walmart. And so those big chain stores are sold through a single channel. Of course, there's libraries, and so getting a book into your local library comes through a distribution chain of all the libraries coming together, meeting with publishers to make sure that a book can be checked out for you. And the schools and education chain, and so making sure that books get into the hands of students K through 12 as well as university. There's also unlikely places that you would expect. So there's airports, there's Canada, there's audio, and special sales. All these different channels for books to bring their way into your lives. And finally, there's international and subsidiary. And so I touched on this a moment ago with rights. And when your book is printed and published in the United States, and then it's for sale in England or Ghana or Japan, it goes through the international and subsidiary rights chain. How the process works. So there's 7 stages at the publishing house. The first is the manuscript and proposal stage. And so the manuscript comes in, and it generally it comes from an agent to an editor or an editorial assistant read that read that manuscript or proposal, and then they bring it with them to the editorial meeting. In most houses, these editorial meetings happen weekly. They've been virtual, as everything has been virtual, and from what I hear, they've been a really great way that people can connect. And so what happens is everyone gets in the room and has a conversation about the books. You go around the table, and the editor or the editorial assistant will say, this is what this book is about, and give this elevator pitch about this book. They have generally a minute to talk about why this book is a book that the house should acquire. Generally what happens in the house is that they've also asked other people to read it, and so the other people who have read it will chime in and say, oh, the characters were amazing, and oh, this author has an incredible presence, and they'll build on why this book is a book they should acquire. The editorial director, the publisher, the sales team, the publicity team at this point may also choose to give it a read. And then the book will come together, and what will happen after that is there will be an offer that is negotiated with the agent, assuming that the conversation comes through, that they think that the money can work. The agent will sign off on it with the author. You'll figure out what the right terms are. It'll come back, and then the manuscript will come in. And so the manuscript and proposal will go back and forth with the editor as they figure out, how do we make sure that this book is as good as it can possibly be? So while that is happening, the design department takes the book and goes and thinks about covers. And so they have a meeting called Cover Conference, and this is the design team, the publisher, and the editor sit together in a room or a virtual room and have a conversation about each book. Oftentimes, books have 3, 5, 7 different covers that are laid out, that are talked about in conference before they brought back from the editor to the agent and the writer. If there's ever a hill that you want to die on, the cover isn't it. There is a lot that goes into trying to make sure that the cover reaches the reader that it needs to reach, understanding who that reader's audience is. So Cover Conference, once the book cover has finally been approved, it moves on into pre-launch. And so this is a sales meeting. This is a period of time when sales gets to hear about the upcoming season for the very first time. And so all of the books from all of the editors will be put together in a presentation, and the publisher and the editors will present for the very first time what the books are going to be coming out from that imprint. They then have some changes and suggestions, and a salesperson might say, oh, yellow covers aren't working for this retailer right now. Can we maybe tweak that so that it's easier to be seen? Can it be a different color? In the thumbnail on Amazon, I can't quite read that beautiful little script that you have on there. Can you tweak that? This book is a bit long. Does it need to be that length? Right? And so the conversations about the cost of paper and about what's happening in the market all come together at pre-launch. The editorial team and the design team, they all work together. They make tweaks. The author might make some tweaks if there are a few. Then it goes out to the launch meeting. So a larger a larger group of sales folks will come together, and the whole house will really start to hear about this book and the full season's worth of books for the first time. Then there are strategy meetings. So what happens is that the sales team goes away now that they've thought about the books that are coming up, and they come back together with some strategy. We think that we'll be able to sell 10,000 copies to this channel and 8,000 copies to that channel. And so they really start to put together a plan for every book and the full season's worth of books on how they're going to sell and what the action plan is. And so that is what's happening in strategy meeting. Sales conference comes together, and the sales team is then having a conversation with all of their sales representatives. There are the in-house sales representatives, and then in many, many houses, there are sales representatives who are in different regions. So there's a Cleveland sales representative, for example. And so they're having these big kickoff conversations on here is what we are publishing this season and why it is going to be amazing and change all these lives. So it's a really pump up, really exciting meeting that they have to launch all these books. As this happens, we're getting closer and closer to the on-sale date. The publicity and marketing team is working at the same time, making sure that the book is getting into as many hands as possible. On-sale date happens, often it's a Tuesday, and the book is released into the world. Everyone has a big moment of relief, takes a breath, celebrates, and then the book begins its next life. So maybe you're wondering, how do I get into this channel at this moment? How does it happen for me? So what's needed? A query letter, a book proposal if you're writing nonfiction. And so we talked about the query letters and what you need to have in them, right? It's just a few paragraphs. It's telling what your story is, why you are the person to write it, and why it needs to be written right now. Inside the query letters, you'll want to have a strong pitch. And a pitch is what it is and why now, and realistic comps. And so that's what you need in a query letter. And a book proposal, there are lots of books and resources all over the web on how to write a book proposal if you're writing a nonfiction project. The keys to remember are that you are explaining a business plan for your book and why it needs to be published right now. So talking about strong queries and realistic comps, this is really a place where you need to do the work to understand your book. You need to know what is your book. You need to know on what shelf it lives. What is its audience? And what are other similar books to your book? And if you say, there's no book like my book out there ever, I'm going to ask, how much have you read? Because reading is the key to really understanding the market, and reading recently. What you read 15 years ago in high school doesn't count. If you're not able to say, in my genre, these are the types of books that are selling right now. And I know they're selling right now because I've been to my bookstore, I've looked online, I've had conversations with my librarian. I know what my book is, and I know other books are like it that have been published in the last 5 years. And I can talk to you about my book really, really easily because I understand who my book is for, what it is, and why it needs to be published right now. I want to talk about pitching. The heart of a pitch is a who, a what, and a twist. And so I want to give you an example from James McBride, for whom I'm a huge fan. So The Good Lord Bird, for example. This book, and I put each of them on a different line, so you can see the who, you can see the what, and you can see the twist. So the who, a young boy born a slave, that's who it is. What happens? He joins John Brown's anti-slavery crusade. And then what's the twist? And must pass as a girl to survive. Oh, right? And so a pitch, a really good pitch, answers those three questions and does it in a sentence. And you're like, whoa, how do I do that? So really that's understanding what your book is. You know who your audience is. You know how to talk about your book. This is hard, good work. And so when you've done that hard, good work, you'll be able to see it. Some ways to see what other people have pitched, there's Google, of course, but you can look at the New York Times list and it'll often give those little book summaries, or when you're reading book reviews, they'll talk about what this book is. Always the back of the flap copy, when you turn over a book and you're reading what that paragraph is, you often get that too. So you can really start to understand what people's pitches are and how they've done them. So that way that you can really practice your own. And there are classes that you can take on that as well. But knowing this and understanding your pitch and figuring out what your pitch might be is key to selling a successful book. I want to talk about comps, and I mentioned that they were tricky before. I'm going to explain what they are, and then I'm going to talk about why they're tricky. And so comps. Remember, a comp is a title like yours that has been published in the last 5 years. And when I say like yours, so Harry Potter, not a comp, right? Harry Potter came on the scene and exploded the idea of a book about a magical kid, right? And then it created a whole new market. And you can't comp to it because one, it's older than 5 years, and two, it's on a different stratosphere, right? You're not going to ever comp yourself to the Bible. Same thing, because it just lives in a different place. You just know not to do that, right? Comps are interesting because they must be within the last 5 years. And you're like, why? Why does 5 years matter? And 5 years matters because the book industry has changed so drastically. 5 years ago, people weren't really listening to audiobooks, and now it's the top selling category. 5 years ago, there were retailers that were open that don't exist anymore. If you think about how book sales work, right? When Borders was a store that people went to, they could create a comparison to books that sold in Borders. But now that Borders has closed and has been closed for so many years that you might not even know what Borders is anymore if you're younger, you have to really give your sales team an example on what comps are real. Because what happens is that book people talk to each other in other books. Oh, this book is like this book and that book. And that helps booksellers understand how much is this going to sell. So, right, we think about the supply chain. So a bookseller has to understand that if they take a financial risk buying X number of copies of a book, that book is going to sell Y number of copies, and that they wouldn't lose from selling another book that would sell greater numbers, right? And then back in the chain, you have to convince your sales team that they will be able to walk into a Barnes & Noble, into an indie retailer, into a Costco and say, I want you to purchase 20,000 copies of this. I want you to purchase 5,000 copies of this title because this title is like X, right? And so when the sales team is out, they generally have a bag of their entire season and they're holding up each book. Each book probably gets about 45 seconds, maybe a minute, if their sales conversation is longer. So let that sink in, right? All this work that you do, all the way down the supply chain, comes down to a salesperson having a conversation with a retailer or an indie book person, a book buyer, saying, this is how many books I think that you can sell of this. This is why this book is going to light you on fire. Right? It's one conversation, because then what happens is that those people then go into the store, and when a reader comes into their stores or searches online, they're able to say, this is the book that will light you on fire. But you need to be all the way back in there to be able to compare your book to other books. So you can start figuring out some comps on where to start, thinking about who are the authors that you follow, what makes their book like yours, and how is your book different from them? What are the best sellers in your genre? And I use the word genre pretty widely. I'm not just talking about romance or mystery or horror. I'm talking about if you're writing self-help, faith-based nonfiction, who are the people in your genre? Who are those books that are out right now? What are those books' sales tracks? How are they doing? Who are the legends, right? Who is the ultimate person in whatever category you're in? What's selling right now? What makes those books like yours, right? If you are comfortable to walk bookstores and libraries, you may go into them. You can do so much online. You can talk to the staff. You can have conversations with your local librarians. You can talk to your writing circle. You can create what you need to understand how your book's comps work. Now that I've explained what comps are, let me explain why they're tricky. So we have a dearth of diverse books because one of the problems that we have is that publishing has 75% of its editorial teams are white or white identifying. Often, this means that we are not seeing diverse stories, which means that there aren't books like yours in your category. And so how do we work through that, right? It's an answer that the entire publishing industry is wrestling with. There are lots of different ways that they're coming across it. There are some editors who are open to submissions directly. There are agents who are asking for submissions specifically of diverse characters. There is a great organization on the kids side called We Need Diverse Books. There are authors and editors and publishing people all the way across who are saying, this is not right. I have a lot of information for you on my website, brandilarsen.com, and then I'll give you what you need as it changes. And it has been changing. 2020 is a year where everything starts one way and moves 6 different other ways. And I'm hopeful that this is the year that we will start to see some real traction. There are problems with the comp system. And also, it is still one of the ways that book people talk, and that it's one of the pillars that you need in order to create a sellable package. Speaking of sellable packaging, I want to talk about book sales. And so really this is understanding how your book fits into it. Behind me is the list, and this is the list, the New York Times bestselling list, the week after George Floyd was murdered. And so you'll see how many people of color are on that list and the types of titles are on that list. I am disappointed to say that this list was the most diverse list ever in the New York Times, and it hasn't been repeated. It stayed this way for a couple weeks and then has dropped off. And so there are few book sales with people that make the list who have brown, black skin. We just don't have the level of depth yet, because we have a publishing industry that does not reflect what we all look like and where we all come from. And so I want you to see what you can do and what is still there to be done. There's a different way to look at book sales that Amazon started doing. And so they created the Amazon charts. And these charts really think about categories in a very specific way. And you may have heard some self-publishing friends and colleagues talk about how they were #1 on Amazon. And they were #1 on Amazon. Sometimes it's #1 in books. Sometimes it's #1 in hardcover nonfiction. If you're on the New York Times list. If you're on the New York Times list, your category will be hardcover nonfiction. If you're on an Amazon bestseller list, your category will be based off of what your book's type is. So what shelf do you live on? Amazon sales is a huge way to generate revenue and to generate sales. Amazon is one of the largest sales channels that exists. And so there are other ways to understand and estimate book sales. And so one of the ways that you can look at book sales is Amazon has a number, and it's their sales rank. And so obviously rank 1, that's moving a lot of titles. Rank 100,000 is not moving as many, right? So you can start to get an idea of where your book falls. So finding an agent, what are other books that are similar? And where to start, thinking about who are the agents, who are the authors that you follow, what makes their book like yours, right? Who are the best sellers in your genre? Who are the legends? Who's selling in your genre right now? These are the same questions I just asked you when you're figuring out the audience of your book. This is also how you reverse engineer yourself back into agents, right? Because in the acknowledgement section of the book, you can see who people's agents are. They'll often thank them, right? And so you want to make sure that you are looking for agents who are working in your genre, who are representing people who you already admire, and who then could represent you. It's really important that people are, it's really important that when you're looking for an agent that you do your homework. Agent Tracker is a really great place, Agent Query. To see the literary marketplace is another place where you can start to understand what someone's sales history has been and what they've been able to do in the genre in which you're writing. and how long, right? If I am an agent and the last sale I had was 10 years ago, perhaps I would question what's going on with that person, right? And so those are Publishers Marketplace is another place. There's a bunch of resources that I'll show in the end that give you places to where to see with agents. Twitter is a great place where lots of agents are hanging out and accepting submissions. One of the big things that is really important as you start doing the work of finding an agent is you'll make a list of these are all the agents who I think would be good for my book, who I would get along with, who I think I would like, who I would want to have a business conversation with, who I could trust with my book, right? You'll make your list of all these people, you'll check their websites. Every agent's gonna ask you for something different. Some people want 20 pages, some people want a query, some people want emails, some people want it through Submittable, right? It's as varied as there are book genres and flavors. And so you'll want to check their website, see if they're open to submissions, and follow the directions on their website. A lot of the directions seem kind of strange, and why are you asking me for this? And sometimes it's like the jelly bean test, right? Penn and Teller famously have a writer in their contract, and I don't know if this is exactly true, but this is what I've heard, that they have blue jelly beans. And the reason that that I've heard that they have blue jelly beans in their dressing room is that they know they have intricate stage rigging. And so if there aren't blue jelly beans, which are the thing at the very, very end of the contract, they can pretty much guarantee that their rig's not right, which is for their safety. And so a lot of agents have kind of very specific, it should be formatted with 1-inch margins, whatever. And they're asking that because they're trying to see if we enter into a business relationship together, can you do as I ask you? Can I trust you to do that? And you need to ask yourself the same question. Is this person someone who I get on with, who will represent me in a way that I appreciate? Troubleshooting. You start to send out queries to editors who are open to unagented submissions and agents who are open for submissions. And you're getting a lot of rejection and you're not understanding quite why. Always good to see, does your book's word count match the word count for the genre, right? You've read so widely in your genre by this point that you'll know, like, oh, most novels are about 80,000 words. And if my book is about 120,000 words, that's going to be difficult for me as a debut author to get that trust. It's not impossible. It's just another hurdle you have to jump through. Is your idea oversaturated? A few years ago when True Blood was a big thing and vampires were kind of everywhere, it was probably an oversaturated place. The other place is now it's harder to get a vampire book out there because everyone's heard and read them, right? And so where do you fall in terms of the idea itself? Has the idea never ever been done? I'm combining 7 genres together in this beautiful hybrid that no one's ever heard of. That's harder to sell. It's not undoable. But when you're having the telephone game of trying to sell to an agent, to an editor, to the editorial team, to the publisher, to the sales team, to the sales team's people, to the salesperson, to a bookstore representative, from the bookstore representative to a person, a reader who is spending their cold, hard-earned $30, right? That they could buy food or a video game or a movie or something for their kids, right? But they're going to buy your book. You have to have it all the way through that chain, be able to explain why that book is worth their time and going to light them on fire. And if it has too many different things that we don't understand, it's going to be harder to sell. Not impossible, just harder, but it might be one of the reasons that's slowing you down. The other question is, are you writing in your area of expertise? This is especially true of nonfiction, right? Do you have the writing that you need and to back it up? Do you have the expertise to back up what you're saying? Does the writing deliver? So we often in publishing talk about, well, it really delivered in the read. And what that means is that when you were sitting down and you were actually reading it, you're immersed, right? It comes alive and dances in your head. We all have those books and those moments inside books that we just feel alive through. Does your book do that on the page? And then finally, what are your publishing goals? Really understanding what your goals are and figuring out what I need and am I doing everything I need, including the homework, to get there. So this is a list of resources that I'll keep up for a moment. So Literary Cleveland, as I mentioned before, there are phenomenal classes that can really help you out as you get started, as you continue to build throughout the process. There's Publishers Marketplace. That is a great place to understand what is being sold right now. There's PW, which stands for Publishers Weekly. That's what the editors and agents are reading. It's a trade magazine. We Need Diverse Books is a great nonprofit organization that is advocating on behalf of authors, especially on the children's, young adult, and middle grade side. Social media, Twitter is a great place. You'll see lots and lots of editors on there. Facebook groups are wonderful for asking questions. Instagram as well. I've given you some helpful hashtags. There's MSWL, which stands for Manuscript Wanted List or Manuscript Wish List. And publishers, editors, authors are all on there. And so there's also something called PitMad, which is when on Twitter you pitch your book. And so remember, this is understanding how your book really works and what your audience is, and being able to distill it down to a single sentence. In this case, it's a single tweet. During PitMad times, an author tweets it, other authors and other folks then retweet it, and then it's liked by an editor or agent, and they're asking you to please send it in a query. There's Own Voices, where you can really start to see what are people look like me writing, what is authentic to me that's being out there. The Authors Guild, so if you have a contract in hand, they are a great resource to help you with legal review, and they're a great place to see what you need. You have to join the guild, but it's a good place to start. NaNoWriMo, so that's 30 days to writing your novel. If you need the impetus to get it done, you can do it as part of an international group who will sit down and attempt to bang out 50,000 words in 30 days in November. Your bookstores, your library, and of course your writing circle. These are all places that have resources for you right now to help you both enter this tricky world of book publishing. You have questions, please reach out to me. I would love to help you. I'm at Brandi Larsen on every single platform. And my website's www.brandilarsen.com, and I'll have a resource section for you there as well. Wanted to say thank you. What a delight it is to be here with you.